Welcome to HyeRoots, Descendants of Ararat. I am Aghjayan, your host for this episode of the first series devoted to Armenian genealogy. With each new episode of HyeRoots, we will explore different resources that will aid those wishing to learn more about their Armenian family history. Today, I will be exploring research into a cluster of DNA matches with my mother and the tools and tricks needed to dig deeper into the history of that family. This is not meant to be an in-depth exploration of DNA testing, but instead is an entree into the subject to set the stage for the other topics to be discussed today. I am sure you are all aware of the DNA tests offered by various companies, many of which advertise extensively. The autosomal DNA test offered by Ancestry.com, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, and 23andMe compare your DNA with the database of those who have DNA tested with their respective companies. So, for example, when testing with Ancestry.com, you are only being compared to those that have also tested at Ancestry. When testing at Family Tree DNA, you are only compared to those in their database. The amount of DNA you share with others is measured in centimorgans. Since 2015, Blaine Bettinger from the genealogist.com has been collecting data on the amount of centimorgans shared by known relations. In 2020, he released version 4 of the results based on 60,000 known relations. From this data, first cousins have a range of 396 to 1,397 centimorgans, with an average of 866. This range drops to 41 to 592 centimorgans for second cousins with an average of 229, and so on for each potential relationship. You'll see from this image a summary of those statistics as well as the other relationships and how much DNA is shared at each level. For our purposes, we will instead know the amount of centimorgans we share with a DNA match, but not the relationship we share with them. Each DNA testing company will supply a range of potential relationships based on their own algorithm. The total shared centimorgans is not the only criteria they use to estimate relationship. Length of the longest segment and the number of matching segments are also used. Note that other resources exist for estimating the relationship. For example, the Shared Centimorgan Project tool at DNApainter.com, where you can input the amount of centimorgans and the probabilities of different relationship groupings will be supplied. In the example shown, for 117 centimorgans, there is a 44% probability of being second cousins once removed, denoted by 2C1R. There is also a 27% likelihood of being third cousins and 14% chance of being third cousins once removed, or 3C1R. Next, let us look at the top 4 DNA matches for my mom at Ancestry.com. I have hidden the identities of the testers other than myself. You can see that I receive 50% of my DNA from my mother. The next match is a known second cousin of my mother, and they share 182 centimorgans of DNA. If I were to put 182 into DNA Painter, the second cousin relationship has only a 38% probability. The likelihood of such a match being second cousins once removed is higher at 51%. While this is an informative cautionary example to not always accept the relationships with highest probability, it is the next 2 matches I wanted to discuss today. They share 117 and 97 centimorgans, respectively, with my mom, and neither was a previous known relation to us. In a vacuum, as noted earlier, the 117 centimorgan match is estimated to be a third cousin by Ancestry.com, though in DNA Painter, second cousin once removed has a higher probability of 44% versus 27%. Again, Ancestry.com is factoring in other metrics besides total shared centimorgans to arrive at third cousin being the more likely relationship. But we are not in a vacuum. We have additional information in the way of matches in common, other people that match both my mother and DNA tests too. All DNA companies allow you to see the matches in common. In addition, since February, when Family Tree DNA added the functionality, you can also see how much DNA the common matches share with each other, and that is very useful information. However, while the other companies offer this feature automatically, in the case of Ancestry.com, it is included in the Pro Tools membership, which currently costs an additional $10 per month. By selecting DNA Test 2, I can see that my mother and DNA Test 2 share 14 people in common, and 4 of those are very closely related to DNA Test 2, but not necessarily to my mother. 2 of the matches at 12 and 15 centimorgans are indicative of such a distant relationship that normally I would not spend much time looking into them. In an Armenian context, the genocide limits our ability to trace 4th and 5th cousins. However, in this case, because they have matches in common with much higher shared DNA, it was an area to focus on. After researching those 5 DNA tests, I was able to build a combined family tree from their most common recent ancestors, Casper Boyajian and Rose Armenian, and the 2 sons they descend from, Casper and Aghjayan. Based on Casper's declaration of intention, he was born in the village of Hye in the region of Kharped. Both Casper and Aghjayan would work as confectioners, one in St. Louis and the other in Cincinnati. One of the 5 testers also tested at Family Tree DNA, where my mother's first cousin also tested, and they are a distant match. Thus, the most recent common ancestors in my family are Aghjayan Sarkeesian and Tarvez Bagdasarian. This part of my family was from the village of Uzanova in the region of Palu. Hye and Uzanova were separated by the Euphrates River, and there even existed a ferry between the locations, as can be seen on this World War I era British military map of the region. The Armenians generally lived in the upper part of Hye, denoted by Yukari on the map. With this many DNA matches, I really like using the probability test tool also offered by DNA Painter. This tool allows you to input any number of DNA matches and test different hypotheses for the relationships. I inputted the 5 matches to my mother plus the 1 to her first cousin, and I tested 6 different hypotheses. Of the 6 hypotheses, 3 can be ruled out immediately as impossible, as 1 or more of the DNA results falls outside the range of what has been experienced with known relatives. For example, hypothesis 1 can be ruled out because the 15 centimorgans of shared DNA between my mother and DNA test 5 falls outside the possible range for second cousins. Similarly, hypothesis 4 and 5 can be ruled out because shared DNA of 117 centimorgans between DNA test 2 and my mother is too high for them to be 4th cousins once removed or a more distant relationship. Of the remaining 3 hypotheses, 1 is overwhelmingly favored at over 80% probability. This hypothesis is further strengthened if we consider that most likely my mother is a generation older than testers 1 through 4. If so, then only hypothesis 3 is viable, though as previously noted, we cannot entirely rule out the other 2 hypotheses. This means that either Rose Armenian or Casper Boyajian is a sibling to one of my mother's maternal great-grandparents. This family tree depicts the hypothetical relationship. I do not know the names of the parents of Tarvez, and while I have shown the mother of Tarvez as the most likely sibling, it could be any of those shown. The 2 daughters of Casper and Tarvez shown in the tree are the only children of the 5 daughters to have survived the genocide. Both Casper and Tarvez were killed during the genocide. Thus, the only records I have for Tarvez are from her daughters, and a patronymic surname of Bagdasarian is all we know currently. So it is through this DNA match that I am hoping to learn more. Is it possible to learn more about the parents of Casper Boyajian and Rose Armenian? 17 years old and single, Casper Boyajian arrived in the United States on April 1st, 1899 on the SS La Bretonne, joining an uncle, Bedros Boyajian, at 273 Spring Street, New York City. 2 years later, Casper's brother Aghjayan, traveling with a relative named Sarkis, arrived in the United States. They were joining an uncle of Aghjayan and cousin of Sarkis, given only by the initial S at 415 West 41st or 44th Street, depending on how you read the record, in New York City. Both Bedros and the mysterious S. Boyajian could supply valuable information about the parents of Garabed, the father of Casper and Aghjayan. As mentioned often in previous episodes, one of the best places to start a search is Mark Arslan's Armenian Immigration Project. In this case, we are interested in searching records of those who listed 273 Spring Street or 415 West 41st Street. One report I find extremely useful is the combined query by street address in the US, Canada, and Mexico. New York City is such a large place that the results span 3 pages. Spring Street is on the 3rd page, and there are a couple of records that immediately catch my interest. Right below the abstract of the record of Casper's arrival is the arrival for a Makar Boyan joining his brother Casper Boyan at 273 Spring Street, just 6 months after Casper Boyajian arrived, going to that address. Could Boyan be a misspelling of Boyajian? When selecting the record, we see that the record is linked by the Armenian Immigration Project to our Casper. Interestingly, though, the records pertaining to Makar and those joining him indicate he was from the Marash region, quite a distance from Shikhaji. In addition, his father clearly seems to have been named Bolos, which is not the same as Casper's father Garabed. Thus, even though Makar would live in Cincinnati and also work as a confectioner, I am not confident in the relationship between the Boyajian brothers and Makar. Makar would use the surname Bogosian throughout his life, presumably in honor of his father, Bolos. The second record of interest is the arrival of Manuk Aghjayan in November 1899. It states he was joining his father Peter Boyajian at 273 Spring Street, the same address for Bedros Boyajian 6 months earlier. From this ship manifest, we learn that Manuk was 35 years old and his last residence had been in Cyprus. The Armenian Immigration Project has no other records associated with Manuk. The name and age of Manuk seem a bit suspect for a son of Bedros, but possibly nonetheless. While there are records available for a Manuk Aghjayan from Palu, that Manuk was 30 years younger than this Manuk, and thus they are not the same person. Looking into the other address of 415 West 41st Street or 44th Street, there are no other records for either address on the Armenian Immigration Project website. For this episode, I want to focus on methods that can be used to track these people over time, even though I won't necessarily get to the answer of additional relatives of Casper and Aghjayan. Let's start with attempting to determine who S. Boyajian was that Aghjayan and Sarkis were joining in 1901. I like to use Ancestry.com for this type of search first. Here's an example where I choose an exact search on the first name, but use an asterisk as a wildcard such that anybody with a first name beginning with S will be included in the results. For last name, I use Boyajian, but select the options to include surnames that sound like or are similar. I narrowed the search to just those who resided in New York State in the year 1901, plus or minus 5 years. Somewhat surprisingly, there are only 7 results. Of these, 3 could be ruled out as women since we are looking for an uncle. Another can be ruled out as New York born and unlikely to be Armenian. That leaves only 3 possible results. 1 record for a Samuel Boyajian and 2 records for a Simon Boyajian. There was also a family tree posted by someone that included a Simon Boyajian and his daughter Arax. Through Ancestry, you can send messages to other members, and reaching out to those with family trees that include people you are interested in can yield important information. In addition, If you and they have taken DNA tests, Ancestry will note if you are a match to them. The addresses associated with these three records do not match the address of R.S. Boyajian, 415 West 41st or 44th Street. After compiling as many records as could be located for Simon Boyajian living in New York City, I compared these addresses to all S. and Simon Boyajians listed as the person joining in the Armenian Immigration Project database. I sorted these by year and compared the addresses. All those highlighted in yellow are those records I have determined to be related to the same Simon Boyajian. The two highlighted in green are the records we are interested in, and as noted, the joining address does not match where this Simon Boyajian was living at the time or any time that I can see. There are years for which Simon is not listed in the New York City directories, and thus I do not know for sure where he was living in 1904, 1907, or 1908. Although we can assume that his address in 1904 is the same as or similar to where he was living in 1903 and 1905, which was the same place. The one record highlighted in blue is interesting as it could relate to the same Simon Boyajian, though I cannot confirm the address from 1907. Hye Boyajian from Karpet was joining his father Simon. By World War I, Hye was living in Ohio and listed R. Avedis as a cousin and his nearest relative. This would seem to confirm that the S. Boyajian referred to in the 1901 ship manifest was Simon. In 1923, Hye traveled to New York City to meet his bride, Pergruhi, and marry. While unfortunately I could not find a church record for this marriage, Family Search contains an abstract of the civil record which confirms Hye parents' names as Simon and Miriam. The Simon Boyajian we have been tracking in New York City welcomed his wife, Hrapsame Uzunyan, in 1898. They would have two children born, Araksi in 1899 and Hagop in 1903. While the address was the same on both birth records, I could not locate this family in the 1900 census. All of the usual search techniques did not yield any results. So my last tip for this episode is that sometimes you have to go to old school techniques. If you search the catalog on Family Search for New York State and select the 1900 census, you will see that Soundex index is freely viewable. The Soundex coding system converts surnames into a numerical representation. It begins with the first initial of the surname, removes all vowels, and converts the remaining consonants to numbers. Boyajian becomes B250. There are online tools to convert surnames into their Soundex code. As you scroll through the images with the Soundex index of B250, the records are organized alphabetically by the first name of the head of household. Through this method, I found Simon listed in the 1900 census under the name Samuel Boyajian. By reviewing the abstract on Ancestry.com, we can see why I struggled to locate Simon. The first and last names were incorrect, and even the house number is coded incorrectly as 348 instead of 398. Note that there was another Samuel Boyajian, the 1900 census record previously identified, when searching for all S. Boyajians in New York City. So again, care must be taken to make sure you have the right person. In this case, the wife Hrapsame, daughter Araksi, and brother-in-law Bedros Uzunyan supplied the confirmation as well as the address of 398 3rd Avenue. While I have not solved this mystery as yet, I hope you found this episode useful in your own Armenian family history research. If you have a question for a future episode, please send it to HyeRoots@hydanik.com.